Your decision to keep reading the sentence was not made by you. That is not a metaphor. That is not a philosophical puzzle designed to make you feel clever at a dinner party. That is what the data says. And the experiment that proved it has been sitting in neuroscience journals for over 40 years, quietly dismantling everything you think you know about your own mind. Stay for the next 10 minutes, because by the end of this, the way you experience every decision you make will have changed permanently. Here is what you assume is happening right now. You think, you decide, you act. That sequence feels so obvious, so fundamental, that questioning it sounds almost offensive. But in 1983, a neurophysiologist named Benjamin Libet ran a deceptively simple experiment in a laboratory in San Francisco, and what he found broke that sequence apart at the seams. The open question you need answered before you leave is this: if your brain makes the decision before you do, then who, exactly, is making it? To understand why that question matters, you need to understand what consciousness feels like from the inside. Right now, you have the distinct sense of being a continuous, unified agent moving through time. You feel like the author of your actions. When you reach for something, you feel the intention arise, you feel the decision crystallize, and then your body moves. That feeling of authorship is so deeply embedded in your experience of being alive that stripping it away does not feel like a scientific finding. It feels like a personal attack, which is exactly what makes Libet's experiment so unsettling. He was not a philosopher speculating from an armchair. He was a rigorous experimentalist, trying to measure something nobody had thought to measure before, the precise moment a person becomes aware of the intention to move. He wanted to find the seam between brain and mind, between the physical event and the felt experience of choosing. What he found instead was that the seam does not exist where you think it does, and that the story your mind tells you about decision-making may be the most sophisticated fiction it produces. His setup was elegant and almost cruel in its simplicity. He sat volunteers in front of a clock. Not a digital clock, but an oscilloscope, with a single dot of light rotating in a circle every 2.5 to 6 seconds. Their only task was this: flex your wrist whenever you feel like it. And when you do, note the position of the dot at the exact moment you first feel the urge to move. That was it. No pressure, no right answer, no competition. Just a spontaneous flick of the wrist at whatever moment felt completely natural. Meanwhile, electrodes placed on their scalps were tracking something called the readiness potential, a slow, steady electrical buildup the brain produces in the seconds before any voluntary movement. Libet wanted to precisely map 3 events in sequence: when the brain starts preparing to move, when the person becomes consciously aware of the urge, and when the actual movement happens. Simple in design, devastating in result. The wrist flexed at time 0. Conscious awareness of the urge to move arrived at roughly negative 200 milliseconds, about a fifth of a second before the movement. That part matched expectations. What shattered expectations was the readiness potential. The brain had already begun its slow electrical climb at negative 550 milliseconds. More than half a second before the subject consciously reported any intention to move, the brain was already committed. The brain had already chosen. The feeling of deciding, the signal you have trusted your entire life, the one your entire sense of self is quietly built on, arrived late to a meeting that had already started without it. That gap is the thing, not 550 milliseconds as an abstract number, as a sequence. Brain first, awareness second. The conscious decision does not initiate the action. It witnesses the initiation and then, in what may be the brain's most convincing trick, it files a report claiming full credit. You are not pulling the trigger. You are being handed a receipt after the transaction already cleared. Now sit with that for a moment, because here is what it means for the last 5 minutes of your experience. Every time you shifted in your seat, every time you adjusted your attention, every time you felt a quiet impulse to stop reading and do something else, every single one of those micro events was preceded by neural activity you had absolutely no access to. The sense that you were in control of each moment was genuine as an experience. The timing was not what it felt like. The sensation of choosing is not false. The sequence of it is, your conscious mind is running about half a second behind the decisions it believes it is making, narrating a story that is technically accurate, but always arriving just after the fact. This is the point in the argument where most people want to stop, because what comes next is either the most disturbing thing you have heard all year, or the most quietly liberating, depending entirely on which part of the data you decide to focus on. In 2008, neuroscientist John Dylan Haynes extended Libet's work using fMRI brain scanning in a study that pushed the finding to a new extreme. His subjects lay inside a scanner and were shown a rapid stream of letters on a screen. Their task was simple. Press one of 2 buttons, left or right, whenever the impulse struck, and note which letter was on screen when they felt themselves decide. The results were staggering. Haynes and his team found patterns of activity in the prefrontal and parietal cortex that could predict which button a subject would press up to 7 full seconds before the subject. consciously reported any intention to choose. 7 seconds, a decision that felt free, spontaneous, and entirely self-generated. The purest possible example of a voluntary choice was already encoded in brain activity nearly a decade of heartbeats before the mind believed it had made up its mind. The subjects reported feeling completely free in every single trial. The scanner held the answer before they did. Now here is the part the headlines always cut. Because the headlines want the clean, devastating version. Free will is an illusion. Consciousness is a passenger. Give up. But Libet himself did not reach that conclusion. He noticed something else buried inside his own data. Something small, easy to overlook, and as it turns out, everything. Even after the readiness potential had begun its long electrical climb, subjects retained the ability to abort the movement at the last moment. They could cancel. The brain was already preparing, the signal already rising toward action, and the conscious mind could still step in and refuse. Libet called this the veto. Not the power to originate an impulse from nothing, the power to intercept one that was already on its way and say no. That is not a loophole. That is the entire architecture of the thing. You are not the author of your impulses. You are the editor of them. And editors hold real power. Every book that has ever moved you was shaped by someone who did not control every word that arrived, but who decided, carefully and deliberately, which words stayed. Think about what that reframes. Every craving you have ever resisted. Everything you said instead of the thing you almost said. Every moment you felt a pull toward something and quietly chose not to follow it. Those were not lucky accidents. Those were not willpower as some mystical reservoir. Those were the veto operating exactly as the data says it should. The conscious mind arriving late to the scene and still managing to change the outcome. Now return to the very first line. Your decision to keep reading this sentence was not made by you. That was true. A neural process running entirely outside your awareness generated the initial momentum. But over the last 10 minutes, at every moment when an impulse to stop or scroll away arose, something in you reviewed it and declined. Not because the impulse was absent, because the veto was available and something used it over and over without announcement. That something, the part that can intercept and redirect and quietly refuse, is not nothing. According to the data Libet spent his career gathering, it may be the most distinctly human capacity you carry. The impulse is not your decision. It is your brain presenting a candidate. The half-second window that opens the moment you become aware of it is the only place where you actually live. Use it carefully. If that idea changes how you move through the rest of your day, share it with someone who could use the same half-second reminder.